Welcome to Love DoOver, where every story is a journey through heartbreak, healing, and rediscovery. In this story, she waited 5 years for her military husband, then found his other family. That night, she got pregnant by her CEO. We dive deep into the raw human emotions that make love both beautiful and devastating. Before we begin, remember this. If you've ever loved and lost, or thought you'll never find love again, this story is for you. Subscribe and turn on notifications to never miss a new tale of heartbreak and rebirth. The first time Edith met Samuel was on a windy afternoon in Chicago when she was 22 years old. It happened inside a small coffee shop near the university campus, the kind of place where the chairs never quite matched, and the barista called everyone friend, whether they liked it or not. Edith had gone there to meet her friend Laura after work. She was sitting at a corner table with her laptop open and a cup of tea she had already forgotten to drink when Laura walked in with someone behind her. "Edith," Laura said, shrugging off her coat, "this is Samuel. He's the reason I'm late." Samuel stepped forward and smiled like he already knew her. "I object to that introduction," he said. "I am not the reason. Traffic is the reason." Edith looked up and smiled politely. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with the kind of relaxed confidence that made strangers comfortable quickly. Laura dropped into the chair beside Edith. "Samuel went to school with my cousin. He's in town for work." Samuel pulled out a chair. "Do you mind if I sit? I promise not to steal your tea." Edith raised an eyebrow. "You'd have to fight me for it." He laughed. "All right, I respect that." Something about him felt easy, not pushy, just comfortable. They started talking, first about ordinary things like work and the city, and whether Chicago winters were unfair to human beings. Samuel said, "I moved here 3 years ago, and I still haven't adjusted to the wind." Edith nodded. "Nobody adjusts. We just complain together." Laura eventually checked her phone and groaned. "I have to run to another meeting." She stood, grabbing her bag. "You two seem to be doing fine without me." Edith blinked. "Wait, that wasn't the plan." Laura winked. "It is now." 5 minutes later, Laura was gone, leaving Edith sitting across from a stranger who seemed perfectly comfortable staying. Samuel leaned back slightly. "So," he said, "do you always meet new people through surprise coffee shop abandonments?" Edith laughed. "Only on Thursdays." That afternoon stretched longer than she expected. They talked about work. Edith worked in finance and liked systems, schedules, and knowing exactly where things were headed. Samuel worked in business consulting and seemed to enjoy chaos a little more than she did. At one point he asked, "Do you ever feel like you're meant to do something bigger?" Edith tilted her head. "That's a heavy question for someone who just met me." He shrugged with a sheepish smile. "I think about it a lot," he said, "like there has to be something more than meetings and spreadsheets." She studied him for a moment. "You don't like spreadsheets?" "I tolerate them." "Well then," she said, "we might struggle." He laughed again. Later that evening, when they finally stepped outside, the wind hit them immediately. Samuel shoved his hands into his coat pockets. "Would it be strange if I asked you out?" he said. Edith thought about it for half a second. "Not strange," she replied, "just bold." "I can live with bold." 2 weeks later, they were still seeing each other. Edith quickly noticed that Samuel had a way of filling spaces with energy. He told stories about traveling for work, about strange hotel experiences, about the time he accidentally gave a presentation in the wrong conference room to a group of confused accountants. "You're kidding," she said. "I wish I was." "And you just kept going?" "Of course," he said. "Confidence is half the job." She laughed so hard, that evening she nearly spilled her drink. Yet in between those light moments, Samuel sometimes said things that caught her attention. One night, while they walked past the campus buildings glowing under streetlights, he said quietly, "I always feel a little restless." Edith looked at him. "Restless how?" He shrugged. "Like I should be doing something else, something that matters more." She nudged his arm gently. "You're 26. Everyone feels like that. Do you?" "Sometimes," she admitted. "But I also like stability. Stability is underrated." He smiled at that. 3 years passed faster than either of them expected. By the time Edith was 25, Chicago felt like their shared city. They had favorite restaurants, favorite walking routes, favorite arguments about whether deep dish pizza counted as real pizza. One evening in early autumn, they were walking along the river. The air smelled like cold water and distant food trucks. Samuel suddenly stopped walking. Edith turned. "Why are you standing there like a statue?" He reached into his coat pocket. "Oh," she said slowly. He smiled nervously. "This was supposed to be a smooth moment. You stopped walking," she pointed out. "Right, bad start." He knelt down. "Edith," he said, "life feels less restless when you're around. Will you marry me?" She stared at him for a moment, surprised by the quiet sincerity in his voice. "Yes," she said. The wedding happened the following summer. It was small, close friends, family, a backyard reception filled with laughter and too much food. 2 years later, life had settled into something comfortable. On most evenings, Edith cooked dinner while Samuel sat at the kitchen counter telling stories from work. "Today, someone tried to pitch an idea that involved 7 spreadsheets and no actual plan," he said one night. "That sounds like your dream project." Cruel. After dinner, they often sat on the couch watching random shows they barely paid attention to. Weekends meant grocery shopping together, occasional road trips, and lazy Sunday mornings. It was not exciting in a big way, but Edith liked it. One evening after dinner, she stood by the sink washing dishes while Samuel dried them. She glanced over her shoulder. "Can I ask you something?" "Sure." She hesitated for a moment. "I've been thinking, maybe we should start trying for a baby." Samuel stopped drying the plate in his hands. He did not look upset, just very still. Edith felt the silence stretch longer than she expected. "You don't like that idea?" she asked gently. He set the plate down. "It's not that." "Then what?" Samuel rubbed the back of his neck, a habit she had seen whenever he was thinking too hard. "There's something I haven't told you." Edith turned fully toward him. Her stomach tightened slightly. "What kind of something?" He took a slow breath. "When I was younger," he said carefully, "I always wanted to join the military." She blinked. "That's unexpected." "My family hated the idea," he continued. "They pushed me toward university instead. Said it was more stable." "You did well, though," she said. "You built a great career." "I know." He looked at her then, his expression serious. "But that feeling never went away. The feeling that I skipped something important." Edith leaned against the counter. "And now? Now I've built investments. We have savings, a house." He paused. "I finally feel like I could do it." Her voice softened. "Do what?" "Serve for a few years." The room suddenly felt smaller. Samuel stepped closer. "I'm not asking forever," he said. "Just 5 years. Then I'll come back and we'll start a family." Edith stared at him. 5 years? "Yes, She did the math in her head automatically. If they waited 5 years, she would be 32. It wasn't impossible. But it wasn't the plan she had quietly built in her mind. Samuel reached for her hands. "Edith, this has been inside me for years. I need to do it." Her voice came out quieter than she expected. "You're asking me to wait," he nodded. "Just 5 years." Later that night, after Samuel had gone to bed, Edith sat alone in the living room. The apartment was quiet, except for the distant sound of traffic outside. She looked around at the life they had built together. 5 years. She whispered it softly to herself. 5 years. The next morning, sunlight slipped through the apartment blinds and landed directly on Edith's face. Normally she would groan, roll over, and bury herself deeper in the pillow, but this time she was already awake. Her mind had been working through the same sentence for hours. 5 years. She lay there staring at the ceiling while Samuel slept beside her. He looked peaceful, which somehow made it worse. How could someone sleep peacefully after dropping a 5-year request into a conversation about babies? Finally, she slid out of bed and walked to the kitchen. A few minutes later, Samuel appeared, rubbing his eyes and scratching the back of his head. "You're up early," he said. Edith poured coffee into a mug and handed it to him. I couldn't sleep, she said. Samuel leaned against the counter. About last night? Yes, about last night. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Edith finally pulled out a chair and sat down. She gestured toward the chair across from her. Sit. Samuel raised an eyebrow. That sounded serious. It is serious. He sat down slowly, holding the coffee mug with both hands. Edith studied his face for a second. She loved this man, that was the problem. Okay, she said quietly. Let's talk. Samuel nodded. She folded her hands on the table, trying to organize the mess inside her head. You want to leave for 5 years? Yes. And during those 5 years, I stay here, waiting. I would visit when I can, he said quickly. Edith tilted her head. When you can, she repeated. He exhaled slowly. Edith, it's not like I'll disappear. But you will disappear, she said, just in a patriotic way. Samuel almost smiled, then caught himself. She leaned back in her chair. Do you realize what 5 years means? She asked. I do. No, she said gently. You understand it for you. I'm not sure you understand it for me. Samuel stayed quiet. Edith continued, speaking carefully because she did not want the conversation to turn into a fight. In 5 years I'll be 32, she said. That's not old, but it's not exactly early motherhood either. He nodded slowly. I know. And during those 5 years, she continued, I'll go to work, come home, eat dinner alone, sleep alone, and repeat the process. Samuel looked down at his mug. Edith watched him carefully. Her voice softened. Are you asking me to pause my life for your dream? The words hung in the air. Samuel lifted his eyes toward her, and since the conversation started, he looked uncertain. I don't want you to pause your life, he said quietly. That's exactly what you're asking. He rubbed his face with both hands. This isn't easy for me either. Edith leaned forward. Then help me understand, she said, because right now it feels like you just handed me 5 years of loneliness and called it a plan. Samuel took a deep breath. When I was younger, he began slowly, I used to watch military documentaries with my dad. I would sit there thinking that one day I'd do something like that. Edith listened without interrupting. But my parents hated the idea, he continued. They told me I was throwing my future away, so I went to university. I built a career. I did everything the sensible way. And now? Edith asked. And now that feeling never left, he said. Every year it's been sitting in the back of my mind like something unfinished. He looked at her carefully. I don't want to wake up at 50, wondering why I ignored it. Edith sighed. Her brain understood his words. Her heart was still annoyed. So the solution, she said, is to leave your wife for 5 years. Samuel winced. That sounds worse when you say it like that. Because it is worse. For a moment they both sat quietly. Then Samuel reached across the table and gently took her hand. I love you, he said. I'm not leaving you. I'm asking you to trust me. Edith stared at their hands. Trust him. 5 years. Her mind felt like it was juggling too many things at once. Later that afternoon, she went for a walk through the neighborhood just to clear her head. Chicago was loud and alive as usual. People were pushing strollers, walking dogs, carrying groceries. At one point she sat on a park bench and watched a little boy chasing pigeons while his mother laughed behind him. Edith folded her arms and leaned back. That could be me, she thought. Except it wouldn't be. Not for a while. 2 days later she was still thinking about it. The following evening she and Samuel were walking along the lakefront path. The wind was cold, and Samuel kept trying to steal her scarf as a joke. Give that back, she said. I'm testing your reflexes. My reflexes involve pushing you into the lake. He laughed. After a few more steps, Edith stopped walking. Samuel. He turned toward her. Yes? She took a breath. I've been thinking about your 5-year plan. His shoulders stiffened slightly. And? He asked. She looked out at the water for a moment. I can't pretend I like it. That's fair. But I also know you, she continued. If you don't do this, You'll carry that restlessness forever." Samuel stayed quiet. She turned back toward him. "So here are my conditions." His eyebrows lifted slightly. "I'm listening." "You visit whenever possible," she said. "Not whenever convenient, whenever possible." "I will. And you stay honest with me. If something changes, you tell me. I don't want surprises." Samuel nodded immediately. "You have my word." Edith studied his face. 5 years, she said again. 5 years, he repeated. 3 weeks later, they stood inside the busy Chicago airport. People moved around them with suitcases and coffee cups, while announcements echoed through the terminal. Samuel adjusted the strap of his bag. "You're going to be okay," he said gently. Edith forced a small smile. "Of course I will. I'm very organized. I'll schedule my sadness between meetings." He laughed softly. Then he stepped forward and wrapped his arms around her. She held him tightly, trying not to think about the empty apartment waiting for her later. When the final boarding call came, Samuel kissed her forehead. "I'll come back," he said. "I know," she replied. A moment later, he walked toward the security gate. Edith stood there watching until he disappeared from sight. She whispered quietly to herself, 5 years isn't forever. Later that evening, she unlocked the apartment door and stepped inside. The space felt different immediately, not empty, just quieter. Edith set her bag down on the table and looked around. Samuel's coffee mug was still sitting in the sink. She stood there for a long moment. Then she sighed softly. "All right," she murmured to the silent room. "Let's see how this goes." The first few weeks after Samuel left felt strange in ways Edith had not expected. The next morning after his flight, she woke up automatically, reaching across the bed, expecting to bump into his shoulder. Her hand landed on a cold pillow instead. She stared at it for a moment. "Well," she muttered to herself, sitting up. "This is going to be annoying." She dragged herself to the kitchen and poured coffee while checking her phone. There was already a message from Samuel. Landed. "Training starts tomorrow. Miss you already." Edith smiled slightly. She typed back quickly. "Good. Try not to embarrass yourself in front of your new military friends." His reply came a minute later. Too late. The following week, she settled into a new routine. Work became the center of everything. If she stayed busy enough, the apartment did not feel so quiet at night. One evening after work, she sat on the couch with her laptop, halfway through answering emails when Samuel called. His face appeared on the screen, slightly blurry. "You look tired," he said. "You look sunburned." "That is because someone forgot to tell me how aggressive the sun can be." Edith leaned back into the couch. "So how is military life so far?" Samuel shrugged. "Lots of yelling, lots of running." She smirked. "I'm enjoying this mental image. Very supportive of you." 2 weeks later, he visited Chicago for the first time since leaving. Edith stood at the airport watching passengers pour through the arrival gate. When Samuel finally appeared, she almost did not recognize him at first. His hair was shorter, his posture straighter. But the grin was the same. He dropped his bag and pulled her into a hug. "Hi," he said into her hair. She laughed against his shoulder. "Hi." The next few days passed quickly. Too quickly. They went to their favorite restaurant near the river. They walked through the city at night like they used to. One evening, while sitting across from him at dinner, Edith watched him talking and thought quietly, "I could get used to this again very easily." Then, 3 days later, he was gone again. That became the pattern. The first year slowly shaped itself into a cycle of waiting and brief reunions. 2 months later, Samuel would visit for a long weekend. 3 months later, he would come again for 4 days. Each time, Edith met him at the airport with the same strange mix of excitement and relief. One night during his second visit, they were sitting on the couch with takeout containers scattered across the coffee table. Samuel looked around the apartment. "You kept everything exactly the same." Edith shrugged. "Well, if I move the couch, you'll probably get lost when you visit." He laughed. "You're doing okay, though?" he asked. "Of course." But later that night, after he fell asleep beside her, Edith stared at the ceiling again. Doing okay and feeling okay were not the same thing. At work, she pushed herself harder than usual. Her office overlooked a busy Chicago street, and she often stayed late after everyone else had left. One evening, about a year after Samuel left, she was finishing a report when someone knocked lightly on the open door. She looked up. Mr. Adam Anderson, the company's CEO, stood there holding a folder. Edith straightened immediately. "Oh, sorry. I didn't realize anyone else was still here." Anderson stepped inside with an easy smile. "I was about to say the same thing." He glanced at her computer screen. "You're still working on the Jones investment report?" "Yes," she said. "I wanted to double-check the numbers." He nodded approvingly. "I appreciate that level of attention." Edith felt slightly self-conscious. "Thank you." He leaned against the doorframe for a moment. "I've noticed you've been taking on more responsibility lately." She shrugged. "I like staying busy." He studied her briefly. "Well, the company benefits from that. Keep it up." As he left, Edith thought briefly that he seemed more observant than most executives she had met. The second year passed faster. Samuel's visits continued, though they sometimes felt shorter. One afternoon, while walking through downtown together, Samuel grabbed her hand suddenly. "What?" she asked. "I just realized something." "What?" "You look even better than the last time I saw you." She raised an eyebrow. "That is a suspicious compliment." "I'm serious." "You're trying to distract me from the fact that you leave again tomorrow." Samuel laughed. "Maybe." That evening they sat at their favorite restaurant again. Edith watched him across the table. "You're still coming back after 5 years, right?" she asked casually. Samuel nodded immediately. "Of course." "Good," she said. Inside her mind, a quiet voice added, "Because I'm counting." The third year arrived with fewer visits but longer phone calls. On their wedding anniversary, they spoke through video chat. Samuel sat somewhere overseas, the background dark behind him. Edith held her phone in the kitchen while eating leftover pasta. "Romantic anniversary dinner," he joked. "Very glamorous," she replied. They talked for nearly an hour about everything and nothing. After the call ended, Edith stood in the kitchen staring at the dark screen. 2 to go. A few months later, she found herself doing mental math more often. If Samuel came back in 2 years, she would be 32. 32 was still young. Plenty of women had babies at 32. Still, she sometimes caught herself watching mothers with small children at the grocery store. Not with jealousy, exactly. Just curiosity about the life she had postponed. At work, her responsibilities continued growing. One afternoon, Anderson called her into his office. "I want you leading the new financial team," he said. Edith blinked. "Are you sure?" "I am." She left the office feeling proud but slightly overwhelmed. The following week, she told Samuel about it during a phone call. "That's amazing," he said. "I knew they'd notice how good you are. Flattery will not get you extra visits. Worth a try." By the beginning of the 4th year, Edith felt something new creeping into her routine. Fatigue, waiting had started to feel heavier. Samuel was scheduled to visit Chicago in early spring. She cleaned the apartment the day before his arrival, humming while she worked, but the next morning, his flight never appeared on the arrival board. She checked her phone repeatedly. No message, no call. By evening, she finally received a short text. "Schedule changed. Deployment extended. I'll call soon." Edith stared at the message for a long moment. "Military schedules change," she reminded herself. She smiled politely. Not yet. Soon. Inside her head, she repeated the same reassurance. Soon. Just soon. Spring came and went during Samuel's 4th year away, and Chicago slowly warmed into summer. At first, Edith kept telling herself the same sentence every morning while brushing her teeth. Military schedules change. It's normal. 2 weeks after his cancelled visit, she still had not heard a proper explanation. There were a few short texts. "Busy right now." "We'll call soon." "Hope work is going well." "Miss you." Edith stared at those messages one night while sitting on the couch. "Miss you." She sighed and tossed the phone onto the coffee table. "Well, that's helpful," she muttered to the empty room. The following week she called him twice, but the calls went straight to voicemail. She told herself not to panic. This is military life, she reminded herself. You knew that when you said yes. Still, a quiet discomfort started sitting in her chest like a small stone she could not remove. At work, she buried herself in projects. One Tuesday evening, the office had already emptied out when Edith finally leaned back in her chair and rubbed her eyes. Her computer screen glowed with rows of numbers. Across the quiet hallway, footsteps approached. A moment later, Adam Anderson appeared in the doorway. "You're still here," he said. Edith straightened quickly. "Oh, hi." He glanced at his watch. "It's almost 9. She forced a small smile. "I like quiet offices." He studied her face for a moment. "You've been working late a lot recently." Edith shrugged lightly. "There's a lot to do." He walked inside and leaned against the desk. "Is everything all right?" She felt a quick flash of embarrassment. Was it that obvious? "Yes," she said quickly. "Just busy." Anderson nodded slowly, but his eyes stayed on her as if he was deciding whether to believe that answer. "Well," he said after a moment, "just remember the building closes eventually. Even hard-working people deserve sleep." She laughed softly. "I'll try to remember that." After he left, Edith stared at the computer again, but the numbers had stopped making sense. Later that night, she returned to the apartment and dropped her bag on the floor. The place felt different lately, not just quiet, still. Samuel's jackets were still hanging in the closet. His books were still stacked on the living room shelf. Even the coffee mug he always used sat exactly where he left it. Sometimes it felt less like a home and more like a museum. She opened the fridge and stared inside. Half a container of yogurt, a bottle of juice, a leftover salad she had forgotten about. She closed the door again. Cooking for one is pointless, she told herself. Instead, she grabbed a bowl of cereal and sat on the couch. 2 months later, the silence from Samuel continued. Not completely silent, just distant. Occasional texts. A short call once every few weeks. One evening, she finally asked him directly during a phone call. "Are you okay?" His voice sounded tired. "Yeah, just busy." "You've been busy for months. It's been a tough rotation." Edith leaned back on the couch. "Do you still plan to visit before the year ends?" There was a pause. "I'll try." That phrase bothered her more than she wanted to admit. "I'll try." After the call ended, she sat quietly staring at the wall. The following week, she stayed at the office until almost 10 again. When Anderson walked past her office, he paused. "You're becoming a permanent resident here," he said. Edith laughed. "I promise I don't sleep under the desk." "You might start charging rent." She closed her laptop and stretched her arms. "Honestly, work is easier than sitting at home staring at my ceiling." The words slipped out before she could stop them. Anderson raised an eyebrow. "Bad ceiling?" "Very judgmental ceiling." He chuckled softly. "Well, if the ceiling gets too rude, you can always go home earlier and avoid it." She smiled politely. But when she finally reached her apartment later that night, the silence greeted her again, like an old roommate. Weeks passed, then months. By the time winter approached, the 5th year was getting close. That thought alone brought Edith a strange wave of energy. He's coming back soon. The next morning, she stood in the bedroom, studying the space carefully. "You know what?" she said out loud. "This place needs help." The following weekend, she started redecorating. She changed the curtains. She moved the dresser. She bought new bedding. While arranging pillows one afternoon, she paused and smiled to herself. In a drawer beside the bed, she quietly placed 2 small baby books she had purchased earlier that week. She ran her fingers across the covers, just in case. 2 weeks later, she called Samuel again. "Your 5-year tour is almost over," she said during the call. "Yeah," he replied. "When exactly are you coming back?" "Soon." Soon again. Edith ignored the small wave of irritation that passed through her. The expected return date finally arrived in early spring. That morning, she woke up earlier than usual, feeling nervous and excited. She dressed carefully and even redid her hair twice. "You're acting ridiculous," she told her reflection. Still, her heart raced as she drove toward the airport. Inside the busy terminal, she stood near the arrival gate, watching passengers appear one after another. Families reunited, couples hugged, Children ran toward parents. Edith checked the board. The flight had landed 20 minutes earlier. Another 10 minutes passed. Then 20. Passengers kept coming through the gate. Samuel did not. Edith frowned and checked her phone. No messages. After another 30 minutes, she approached the airline desk. "Excuse me," she said. "I'm waiting for someone from Flight 482. Could you confirm the passenger list?" The woman behind the counter typed for a moment. "Samuel Miller?" she asked. "Yes." The woman glanced at the screen. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but he wasn't on that flight." Edith blinked. "That's not possible." The woman gave a polite shrug. Sometimes plans change. Confused and slightly shaken, Edith spent the next 2 days making phone calls. She contacted military offices, left messages, sent emails. Finally, 3 days later, someone returned her call. The voice on the phone sounded tired but professional. "You're asking about Samuel Miller?" "Yes," Edith said quickly. "He was supposed to return this week." There was a pause. Then the man said something that made the room feel suddenly very small. "Ma'am, according to our records, Samuel Miller completed his service and returned home nearly a year ago." Edith sat in her apartment staring at the phone, her hands tight around the receiver. The voice on the other end had given her a small spark of hope. There was an address, a Denver address. She barely heard the words after that, her mind repeating them like a broken record. 2 days later, she was on a flight, watching the city shrink beneath the clouds. Chicago had been her life for so long, but now every street, every skyline, felt hollow without Samuel. She tried to steady her breathing, telling herself that this wasn't about anger yet. It was about answers. When the plane touched down in Denver, the air was sharp and cold, different from Chicago's river-warmed breeze. She grabbed a cab and repeated the address to the driver. The car wound through quiet streets until it stopped in front of a modest house tucked behind a row of townhouses. Edith's heart raced. She walked slowly to the front door, rehearsing words she didn't have yet. She could see through the window, a man holding a baby, laughing softly at something the child did. The woman beside him smiled, brushing a stray strand of hair behind her ear. Her chest tightened. Samuel, that was him, holding that baby, with her, not her. She raised her hand and knocked, a single firm rap. Inside, the laughter stopped. Footsteps approached. The door opened, and Samuel's eyes met hers. His mouth opened and closed once, twice, before he finally spoke. "Edith." She didn't step forward. Her voice was quiet, but it carried. "Samuel, what is this?" He looked past her for a moment, then back. "Edith. She cut him off. "When did my life stop mattering to you?" The words came out sharper than she intended. The sting in her own voice surprised her. Samuel's shoulders slumped. He stepped aside, gesturing for her to come in. Edith hesitated, looking at the baby again, at the woman beside him, at the small chaos of a life that wasn't hers. "I met Joan during deployment," Samuel said quietly, his voice almost pleading. She needed someone. She became pregnant. I didn't know how to tell you." Edith's mind spun. "You didn't know how to tell me. Do you have any idea how many nights I spent waiting, imagining you walking through the door, waiting for a visit that never came?" He ran a hand over his face. I thought I could keep both lives. I wanted to help her, Edith. I didn't want to hurt anyone." Her stomach twisted. "So you let me wait. 5 years. You let me build a life in my head that didn't exist." "I was scared," he admitted. "I didn't know how to face you. I thought if I left early to help Joan, maybe you'd understand later." Edith shook her head, tears threatening but not yet falling. "Understand later? Samuel, I gave you my trust, my time, my life. And you used it to build someone else's life." He stepped closer, but she held up her hand, stopping him. "Don't." For a long moment, there was only the quiet hum of the heater and the soft cooing of the baby. Edith's gaze fell to the floor, then slowly lifted to her left hand. She removed her wedding ring and held it in her palm. I can't do this," she said softly. "I thought I could face whatever happened, but this isn't something I can forgive right now." She turned and walked toward the door, her steps measured, her chest tight. She didn't look back as she opened it, didn't hear Samuel's voice calling her name, didn't let herself break down in front of him. Outside, the cold Denver air hit her, sharp and clear. She slid the ring into her coat pocket, a small weight that somehow felt lighter than the weight in her chest. She took a deep breath and started down the walkway, each step echoing in her mind. The life she had imagined, the years she had counted, had vanished in a single revelation. And yet, moving forward, leaving the house, leaving Samuel, felt like the first time she was in control of her own story. Edith didn't cry, not yet. She didn't scream, not yet. She simply walked to the cab waiting at the curb, climbed inside and said to the airport. The cab pulled away, leaving the house behind. Through the window, she caught a glimpse of Samuel standing on the porch, looking smaller somehow, though she knew he never felt that way in her memory. She pressed her hand to the window, not touching the glass, just holding it close enough to feel the separation. Her thoughts were a mix of anger, disbelief, and an odd sense of relief. Relief that she had seen the truth. Relief that she could now start untangling the years of waiting from her heart. Later that evening, in the flight back, Edith sat on the edge of the seat holding the ring in her hand. She stared at it for a long time, then put it inside her bag. The weight of it no longer felt like a burden. It felt like a memory she could now put down. She leaned back against the seat, closed her eyes and let herself breathe. She allowed herself to think of the future without Samuel, without the impossible waiting, without the hope that had kept her awake at night. Somewhere deep down, a small part of her still ached, but there was also clarity. She had faced the other life he had built. She had asked her question and heard the answer. And now, she could start thinking about her own life again. Edith allowed herself to imagine a life she could build without him. Edith stepped off the cab and stood outside her Chicago apartment building, her coat pulled tight around her. The city lights reflected off the wet pavement from a recent rain, but it didn't warm her at all. She stared at the door for a long moment, imagining Samuel's voice, his face, the life she had lost. Her fingers grazed the handle and she pulled back. No, she couldn't. Not yet. Instead, she turned and walked toward her office building downtown. The streets were quiet, the usual hum of traffic reduced to a few distant cars. By the time she reached the revolving doors, her chest ached with exhaustion and grief, and she felt like she had been carrying the weight of 5 years in her bag. Inside, the lobby was empty except for one familiar figure. Adam Anderson sat behind the reception desk, flipping through a folder. His eyes lifted when he noticed her. "Edith?" he asked softly, his voice carrying that calm authority she had always found reassuring. "It's late. Are you okay?" Edith tried to speak, but her voice cracked. She shook her head, gripping the straps of her bag. I needed—" She swallowed hard, blinking rapidly. "I didn't know where else to go." Anderson rose from the desk and approached her, keeping his voice gentle. "It's okay. Come on, let's sit down. Come on." He led her to the office suite on the top floor. The building was nearly silent, except for the faint hum of the elevators and the distant city sounds. He offered her a chair while he prepared tea, the steam rising in soft spirals. Edith's hands trembled as she pulled her coat tighter around her. She finally let the tears come, hiding her face in her hands. "It's Samuel," she whispered. It's over. There's someone else. And a baby." Her words tumbled out in fragments, the sentences breaking as sobs shook her. Anderson didn't interrupt. He simply handed her the cup of tea when she finally looked up, his expression calm, attentive. "Thank you," she whispered, taking a sip. The warmth was grounding, but it did nothing to stop the ache. "I can't believe I waited 5 years," she said, her voice low almost to herself. "I counted every day, every week. I believed he would come back for me. I gave him my life while he—" She stopped, shaking her head. Anderson sat across from her, watching quietly. "I've seen you work through impossible challenges, Edith," he said softly. "I've admired your strength for years, but this— I can see how much this hurts." Her eyes met his. There was no judgment there, only an understanding that felt almost dangerous in its closeness. "I don't know who I am anymore," she admitted. "I thought waiting was a choice, but now it feels like I lost myself along the way." Anderson leaned slightly forward. "You didn't lose yourself. You survived. That's what matters. And surviving takes courage more than most people can manage." Edith let out a shaky laugh. "Courage, it feels like cowardice. I sat and waited. I let all of it happen." "No," Anderson said firmly. "You acted with love. You acted with hope. That's the bravest thing I've ever seen anyone do." Her chest tightened at his words. She didn't notice how close he had shifted until their knees brushed under the small meeting table. She looked down, embarrassed, but also aware that the connection between them had shifted subtly, charged with something more than conversation. "Adam," she started, then stopped, unsure if she wanted to continue. He reached out, gently lifting her chin so their eyes met. "Edith, it's okay," he whispered. "I'm here." The next moment, their lips met. Soft at first, almost hesitant, and then something deeper, an impulse neither had planned, but both had been holding back for years. The warmth of the tea, the quiet of the office, the safety of his presence, it all collided, and Edith let herself feel it. The kiss broke, then returned, longer this time, more insistent. The office, the night, the city outside, they disappeared. Hours passed in a blur. At some point, the tea grew cold on the table. Edith lost track of time, lost track of herself. Finally, she pulled back, resting her forehead against his. I need to go," she whispered. Anderson nodded slowly, his expression conflicted but gentle. "I understand." She left the office quietly, moving through the empty lobby with a sense of both relief and shame. The city streets were still dark, the lights reflecting on wet asphalt like scattered stars. She hugged her coat tighter around her, feeling both warmth and weight in her chest. By the time she reached the cab, the first hints of dawn were brushing the skyline. Her hands held her bag tightly, but she also felt something else, a flicker of possibility, a strange new thread weaving through the wreckage of her emotions. Edith didn't cry this time. She didn't look back. She let the cab take her home, not knowing what awaited her there, only knowing that she had crossed a line she didn't regret entirely. And at that moment, she allowed herself to feel something messy and confusing and something beyond grief. And as the cab rolled through the quiet streets, she whispered to herself, almost like a promise, "I'll figure it out somehow." Edith woke one morning 2 weeks after that night in the office with a queasy feeling in her stomach that she couldn't shake. At first, she tried to ignore it, blaming stress, leftover dinner, or maybe just nerves from the city that always felt too loud. By midday, though, the thought had burrowed too deep to dismiss. She went to the drugstore and bought a test, her hands trembling more than she expected. Later that afternoon, she held the small stick in her hands, staring at the tiny window like it held all the answers to a question she wasn't sure she was ready to ask. When the line appeared, faint but unmistakable, a wave of panic rolled through her. She sank onto the bathroom floor, hugging her knees, and whispered to herself, oh God, what have I done?" She didn't call Anderson. She didn't call anyone. The thought of explaining, of opening herself up to questions, judgment, or complications made her feel exposed. The idea of scandal, no matter how ridiculous, hung over her like a storm cloud. By the next morning, Edith had drafted her resignation email. She stared at the screen for what felt like hours, deleting and rewriting the first lines a dozen times. "Dear Mr. Anderson, I am resigning effective immediately. I have appreciated the opportunities." No, too formal. "Adam, I need to step away from the company." Still wrong. Finally, she sent it. Her hands shook as she hit send. She didn't wait for a response. She packed a small bag, loaded it into her car, and drove away from Chicago without looking back. She let the streets of the city blur past her like an old memory she was trying to forget. By evening, she had reached a small coastal town, quiet and tucked between rolling cliffs and the grey-blue expanse of the ocean. The air smelled of salt and seaweed. It felt clean, sharp, and strangely forgiving. She rented a modest cottage with peeling white paint and a tiny garden in front. The first week she spent unpacking, making the small space hers. She arranged books, set out the kitchen utensils, and even put a few bright towels in the bathroom. She tried to focus on the routine, the daily tasks, to keep her mind from spiraling. "Okay, Edith," she muttered to herself one morning while chopping vegetables. "This is your life now. Just make it work." And work it did, in its own quiet way. Days passed slowly. She found a rhythm. Morning walks along the cliff, afternoons spent cooking or reading, evenings listening to the waves crash against the rocks. She bought baby clothes and folded them carefully into a drawer she didn't open too often, not yet ready to face the reality that they were hers to prepare for alone. At first, the isolation felt heavy. She missed Chicago, the noise, the people, even the traffic, and the strange comfort of a life where she at least knew the rules. But gradually, the town began to feel like a place that could hold her, a soft space where she could breathe. Some days she caught herself wondering if Anderson had noticed her absence. Did he check her desk? Did he wonder why she had vanished without a word? She didn't want to know. She couldn't handle a life in which she was constantly reminded that she had left someone waiting, even unintentionally. She spent months preparing for the baby, learning what she could, fixing the cottage to make it safe, and walking the shoreline to keep herself moving. Even in the smallest moments, she felt a strange mixture of fear and anticipation. She tried to imagine the child she would raise, wondering whose eyes they would have, whose laugh, whose stubbornness. One late afternoon, 4 months into the pregnancy, she was sitting on the couch sipping tea and sketching ideas for the baby's room when she heard a knock at the door. It was loud, insistent. She froze, her hand halfway to the door. She peeked through the curtain and saw a figure standing on the porch. "Adam?" she whispered, barely daring to believe her eyes. He was there, his coat wrapped around him against the coastal breeze, his expression unreadable but undeniably concerned. Her stomach clenched. Questions, fears, and a rush of emotions collided in her chest. She hadn't seen him in months. She hadn't planned for him to find her. And yet here he was standing on her doorstep as if nothing in the world could keep him away. Edith swallowed hard and stepped back from the door, her hand on the knob. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice steadier than she felt. Adam took a slow step forward. "I needed to see you. I had to make sure you were okay." She hesitated, caught between shutting the door and letting him in, between fear and the strange pull she had felt since that night in the office. "I'm fine," she said finally, but even as she spoke, she knew it wasn't the whole truth. Adam didn't push. He just nodded, waiting, his gaze steady. The wind from the ocean blew through the small garden, tossing her hair across her face. Edith blinked away tears she hadn't realized were forming. She opened the door fully to let him see her, to let the moment exist without judgment. Adam looked at her for a long moment, as if memorizing the lines of her face, the subtle changes time and distance had left behind. Then he spoke softly. "I found you," he said. "I needed to." Edith stepped back, letting him enter the cottage. The walls were small, cozy, and unremarkable. But tonight they would hold a conversation neither of them could have predicted, one that would shape the next chapter of both their lives. And since leaving Chicago, Edith felt the stirrings of hope mixed with fear. She didn't know what would come next, but she knew she would face it head-on, and maybe, just maybe, she didn't have to face it alone. Edith was in the kitchen, leaning against the counter, stirring a cup of chamomile tea she had barely touched. The small coastal cottage smelled faintly of salt and old wood. Outside, the wind carried the low roar of the ocean, and the blinds swayed slightly in the draught. Adam Anderson had been sitting at the small dining table since she had let him in, watching her with quiet patience. "Edith," he said finally, breaking the silence, "I need you to understand something. I didn't just find you by chance." She glanced at him, frowning. "You've been stalking me?" she asked half-jokingly, but the tremor in her voice betrayed the tension she felt. "No," he said quickly, holding up his hands. "Not stalking. I've been searching for you for months. After that night, I realized I couldn't leave things like that. I kept trying to figure out where you went, and when I calculated the timing—" He paused, his voice softening. "I suspected you might be expecting." Edith's heart skipped. The words were simple, almost factual, but they carried a weight that made her chest tighten. "You suspected?" she asked. You knew I was carrying your child?" He nodded. "I didn't want to assume, but I had to know if you were safe. I had to find you." She took a deep breath, trying to steady the mixture of relief and fear rising inside her. "It's yours," she said quietly. "The baby. It's yours." Adam leaned back slightly, but there was no surprise, no anger in his face. Just calm. Just focus. "I know," he said, "and that's why I'm here. I want to take responsibility. I want a real family. With you." Edith blinked. Her first instinct was skepticism. "Is this because of the baby? Are you only here because you feel obligated?" Her voice was sharp, but it wasn't loud. The fear of disappointment hovered just beneath her words. "No," he said firmly. He reached across the table, resting his hand near hers, careful not to touch unless she allowed it. "Edith, I've admired you for years. Long before that night, long before anything happened. Your strength, your focus, the way you care about people. I've noticed all of it, and that's why I'm here. Not because I have to be, but because I want to be." Edith's hands tightened around her cup. She wanted to believe him, but the last few months of uncertainty made it difficult. She swallowed and set the cup down. "You have no idea what it's been like. Leaving Chicago, leaving everything. Trying to start over on my own, thinking I had to face this pregnancy alone." "I can imagine," Adam said softly, leaning forward. "I know it's not easy, Edith, and I want you to know that I'm not here because I feel I have to be. I'm here because I want to be. I want to be part of this with you. From the very start." She stared at him, her mind spinning with all the nights she had walked along the cliffs trying to calm herself, the quiet hours spent imagining what her future might look like. The months she had spent building routines and making a small life in this cottage suddenly felt both fragile and precious. "I don't know if I can trust you," she admitted, her voice trembling. "It's not just about the baby, and it's everything. I've been so careful, so alone, and now you're here, offering—" "What exactly? How do I know this isn't just a sense of obligation?" Adam shook his head gently. "It's not obligation. It's choice. I've admired you for so long, Edith, even before that night. Everything I've done, everything I've thought about you, it's because I see you, really see you. I want this family with you, and I want it because I care, not because I have to." As hours passed as they talked, the ocean murmuring outside, she asked the questions she had kept tucked away, about whether he was serious, about how he saw the future, about whether he could really be a part of her life and the baby's. He answered each one without hesitation, without pretense, only calm focus and honesty. Edith found herself listening, really listening, for the first time in months. She realized that the man in front of her wasn't someone passing through her life or reacting to circumstance. He was fully present, attentive, and committed. At some point, she let herself laugh softly when he recounted a quirky moment from the Chicago office, a way he had noticed how she always arranged her desk just so. It felt like a bridge, connecting the anxiety and fear she had carried to something lighter, something normal. "I think I might be able to trust you," she admitted after a pause, surprising herself. Her voice was quiet, almost a whisper. Adam reached across the table, letting their fingers brush lightly. "Then we'll take it one day at a time, Edith. For you, for the baby, for us. No pressure, no rush. Just honesty and care from now on." Edith felt the tension in her chest ease just a little. She wasn't fully healed and she wasn't fully certain, but the sincerity in his eyes, the calm determination in his voice, and the thought of building something real together started to settle something fragile inside her. She leaned back in her chair, letting the wind from the ocean drift through the window. The room was quiet except for the low hum of the heater and the distant crash of waves. Edith felt a cautious, trembling hope that maybe, finally, she wouldn't have to face the next chapter alone. She sipped her tea again, slower this time, and allowed herself to believe just a little that the truth could be a beginning instead of the end. Edith woke in the hospital room one early morning, the sterile scent mingling strangely with the faint aroma of flowers someone had left on the windowsill. She was exhausted, achingly sore, and her mind felt like it had run a marathon, but when she looked down at the tiny, wriggling bundle in her arms, all the pain seemed to settle somewhere else, leaving a strange warmth behind. Adam sat beside her in a slightly squeaky chair, his jacket draped over the back. He hadn't moved from her side since she arrived, his hand resting lightly on the mattress, fingers brushing hers occasionally as if afraid to let go. "She's beautiful," he whispered, leaning over to get a closer look, though he didn't want to crowd her space. Edith smiled tiredly, adjusting the baby in her arms. "She is," she agreed, "and loud already. Just like her father," she teased, though the words didn't quite hide the tremor in her voice. Adam chuckled softly. "Maybe a little of both of us," he said. "A perfect combination." Later that morning, after the nurses had moved on to other patients, the room was quiet except for soft coos and the occasional beep from the monitor. Edith watched Adam gently hold the baby for the first time, his focus so complete it made her heart ache in a way that felt good. "You know," he said quietly, glancing at her, "I never thought I'd feel like this, like fully responsible for something so tiny, so perfect, and I've never wanted anything more than to be here with you." She looked at him, studying the way his expression softened, how carefully he cradled the little life they had brought into the world. "You're doing fine," she said, trying to sound casual, though inside she felt the tight coil of gratitude and relief unwind a little. The next few weeks passed in a blur. Between diaper changes, feeding schedules, and short, exhausted naps, Edith and Adam found themselves talking in ways they hadn't before. Small confessions, shared laughter over clumsy parenting moments, and quiet reassurance in moments of uncertainty strengthened the bond that had been tentative just months earlier. One afternoon, Edith was rocking the baby in a small park near the cottage, the wind carrying the salty scent of the sea. Adam had wandered a few steps away, fiddling with a stroller he hadn't quite mastered yet, and she found herself watching him with a mixture of amusement and affection. "You know," she said, laughing softly, "I used to think parenthood would be scary, lonely, hard, but having you here makes it feel like maybe not so bad." He turned, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "I could say the same," he said. "It's terrifying, yes, but you make it feel possible." A week later, as she was arranging some baby clothes in the nursery, her phone vibrated. The name on the screen made her stomach tighten. Samuel. Her first instinct was to ignore it, to let it go straight to voicemail, but something in her made her glance at it. She stared at the screen for a long moment. Memories flickered through her mind, the waiting, the hope, the heartbreak, the betrayal. She pressed the decline button, sending the call to voicemail without a second thought. Adam, who had been in the living room reading, peeked around the doorway. "Everything okay?" she exhaled, shaking her head slightly. Yes, just someone from the past. That chapter's closed." Adam nodded without needing more explanation, settling back into his chair with a small, understanding smile. Edith felt the tension in her chest ease. That chapter was closed, and she was finally allowed to live fully in this one. Months passed. The divorce was finalized, and life in the small coastal town grew comfortable, familiar, and safe. One evening, after putting the baby to sleep, Adam knelt on the living room floor, pulling a small velvet box from his pocket. "Edith," he began, voice low and steady, "I don't want to imagine my life without you in it. I don't want to imagine raising this little one without you by my side. Will you marry me?" She froze, staring at him, her heart pounding in a mix of disbelief and longing. Her mind raced, thinking of past heartbreak, the fear of vulnerability, and the lessons of patience and resilience she had learned over the years. I don't know," she said finally, shaking her head slightly, tears pricking her eyes. "It's not that I don't want to, Adam. It's a lot." He reached for her hand, gently holding it. "Take your time, there's no rush, I'm not going anywhere." She looked into his eyes, reading the sincerity there, and slowly a smile broke through. "Yes," she whispered, voice steadying. "Yes, I'll marry you." The following weeks were filled with planning, laughter, and the comfortable routines of a family learning to live together. Their home, once quiet and solitary, began to feel warm, vibrant, and full of life. Baby toys scattered the living room, their laughter echoing through the small halls. They cooked together, took walks along the cliffs, and shared late-night conversations about everything from the trivial to the profound. Edith found herself thinking occasionally of the past, of Samuel and the years she had waited. But those thoughts no longer carried sharp pain. They were memories, bittersweet but distant, reminders of how far she had come. One evening, as she tucked the baby into bed, she leaned against Adam, watching the sun dip below the horizon. "I never imagined it would feel like this," she murmured. "Like what?" he asked, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Like home," she said softly. "Like love that's real and steady, even after everything else." Adam smiled, pressing a gentle kiss to her temple. "Then let's make it ours," he said. And in that small coastal town, with the waves carrying their laughter and their quiet moments, Edith finally allowed herself to believe in love again. She had chosen it, not the easy way, not the way she expected, but the right way, with honesty, partnership, and hope woven into every day. The past was behind her. The future stretched out, uncertain but full, and she was ready to meet it, together. Edith stepped off the train into the familiar hum of Chicago, the city alive with the rush of footsteps, taxi horns, and distant construction. The air smelled faintly of rain and asphalt, a scent she hadn't realized she missed until now. She tightened her scarf around her neck and glanced at Adam, who held their child's hand firmly, guiding her through the crowd. "It feels smaller than I remember," Edith said quietly, almost to herself. Her eyes drifted toward the river, where the lights shimmered on the water's surface, and memories tugged at her, long nights walking alone, waiting for a promise that never came. Adam glanced at her, reading the tension behind her smile. "Are you okay?" he asked gently. Edith smiled, a small wistful curve of her lips. "Yeah, it's just the city. Brings back a lot of old ghosts, I guess." She took a deep breath, watching their child skip ahead, laughing at the pigeons in Millennium Park. They moved through the streets slowly, stopping for coffee at a place Edith remembered from her university days. The aroma of espresso and baked goods pulled her into the present. She stirred her latte, her mind wandering as she watched Adam lean down to tie their child's shoelace, his hair catching the morning light. "Mom, watch me!" their child shouted, already running ahead to the fountain. Edith laughed softly, letting herself relax. "Go on," she said. "I'll catch you in a second." As she watched, her mind flickered back to Samuel, the long years of waiting, the empty apartments, the silence, the betrayal. For a moment she felt the old sting, sharp and familiar, but it was fleeting. The pain had lost its power over her. It was a memory, a shadow from a chapter she had closed. 2 weeks later, they explored more of the city. Edith wandered along the riverwalk, fingers brushing the cold railing, letting the wind whip around her. Adam walked beside her, their child bouncing between them. "You okay?" he asked again, sensing her quiet reflection. "I am," she said. "I think I'm finally okay." She stopped and looked out at the water, thinking about how far she had come. The years of uncertainty, heartbreak, and fear of the future had led her here, to a life she had built herself, with someone who chose her every day. Later that evening, they found a small park near the Magnificent Mile. Adam spread a blanket and they sat down, their child running circles around them, squealing with delight. Edith watched Adam laugh as he chased after her, his movements unguarded and free. Her heart swelled in a way that felt warm and steady, not frantic or desperate. She realized she hadn't thought about Samuel in days. Not in anger, not in longing, not in what-ifs. He existed only as a distant memory, a part of the past that had shaped her but no longer defined her. "Hey," Adam said, nudging her gently with his shoulder. "You're quiet over there, thinking about something." Edith smiled at him, a real full smile that reached her eyes. "Just thinking about how strange life is," she said, "how it twists and turns, And sometimes the pain you think will define you ends up teaching you how to live instead. Adam took her hand, fingers intertwining with hers. "I'm glad it brought you to me," he said softly. "And to us." Their child ran up, collapsing into their laps, giggling and grabbing at Edith's scarf. She held them both, feeling the weight and the joy at the same time. For a long moment she simply breathed, letting herself sit in this ordinary, perfect life. A few years later, Edith returned to Chicago occasionally, sometimes alone, sometimes with Adam and the child. Each visit carried echoes of the past, but instead of pain, she felt distance. The city had changed, and so had she. Walking past the coffee shop where she had once met Samuel, she smiled faintly, remembering the girl she had been, the hopes she had clung to, and the lessons she had learned. She realized that love hadn't come in the way she expected. It hadn't been a fairy tale, and it hadn't arrived on her schedule. But it had come, patiently and persistently, through honesty, commitment, and shared mornings and nights, through the laughter of a child and quiet conversations that stretched into hours. As they boarded the train to leave the city, Edith watched Adam and their child sitting together, shoulders touching, small hands intertwined. Her heart felt full in a way that had once seemed impossible. She thought about the waiting, the heartbreak, and the long, uncertain road that had brought her here, and she knew that all of it had been necessary to reach this moment. Finally, she allowed herself a deep, steady breath, a small laugh escaping her lips as their child pressed a sticky hand against her cheek. "We made it," she said softly, more to herself than anyone else. "We really made it." And in that moment, Edith understood completely. The heartbreak had not been the end. It was only a chapter, a prelude to a love that arrived in a way she had never imagined. She had chosen herself, chosen honesty, and chosen love again. And now she was living it, fully, without fear or hesitation. Chicago faded behind them as the train rattled forward. But Edith carried the city's lessons with her, a bittersweet memory softened by time, distance, and a life rebuilt with laughter, trust, and the kind of love that healed every crack. She leaned her head on Adam's shoulder and smiled finally, completely, ready for all that the future would bring.